So I was just talking about emergent infectious diseases. So these are diseases that kind of become an issue within the last 20, 30 years or so. So these are separate from these historical diseases that used to kill millions of people. And so some of them do affect millions, like HIV/AIDS is affecting 33 million people today. Um, I just talked about Ebola. Ebola is this like really scary viral disease that has very quickly kills people in just awful, bloody way. Um, and it's extremely lethal, as in if you catch it, then likelihood of dying from it is pretty high. However, it's very rare and it's very contained, so it's not like an epidemic or anything like that. That would be really scary. Um, This is a really weird disease. It's mad cow disease. It was like a big deal in the 80s and into maybe 80s or 90s. It comes from, so it's a pathogen in that it's biological, but it's not a virus or a bacteria. It's a protein, right? So that means, it's not like can multiply on its own. So mad cow disease come from these mutated proteins from the nervous system of cows, right? So if you consume an affected cow, and that includes parts of the nervous system. So if you, I guess it's like ground meat and things like that, then you could get this disease, and usually proteins get denatured when you cook them, but apparently with this particular protein, cooking it, heating it doesn't neutralize or destroy the protein. So you could still get sick from it if you eat it. And the only way that it could spread from a cow to cow is if the cows are fed parts of other cows. Now, cows are herbivores, so this really shouldn't happen naturally, but there was a practice and which has been banned since then because of this, of feeding cows ground up meats of other cows, just to increase the protein content in their feed or something like that. So and that was what's spreading the disease, and it caused a huge issue, because it was started in some cows in England. And so like British beef was banned for a while and things like that. And then they had to destroy like hundreds of thousands of cattle to prevent the spread. But I think since then it's been, because this practice has been banned, this feeding cows to cows. So I think it's under control. But it was pretty scary at one point. Another kind of up and coming diseases that wasn't really big an issue. Some of the viral flu like things. So bird flu is something that's kind of mutated from birds to humans. All right, so it's jumped from birds to us, mainly coming from domesticated birds, and people working in close proximity to them. And it's a flu, but I guess it's a little bit, because it's new. I think that's why it's a concern, because when you have a new flu virus coming along, we don't have a kind of a resistance to them, because we develop resistance to these viruses over time. But if it's something brand new, our bodies just kind of not ready for it, and then it could have make us much sicker. West Nile is another one that has it's kind of jumping from birds to us. This one is carried by mosquitoes, and it mainly affects birds. And there's for some birds it's very deadly, but it could also affect us as well. And again, I believe it's just kind of a flu-like symptoms, right? More recently, there was Zika, right? So Zika is also a mosquito spread. I think it was, yeah, it's Zika. It's a virus that was causing birth defects. This microcephaly, which is, so babies are born with small heads, and all the developmental problems associated with that, as a result of pregnant women getting bit by mosquitoes at a particular time. So it was suggested, when this was a big problem, to not to travel to these areas that had Zika virus potential. So if you're pregnant, you weren't supposed to travel to those areas. So that was a recent thing that happened. That's not really a new book. So so these historical diseases are mostly under control because we have medications, antibiotics especially, to control them. So that is, you know, except for malaria. I think malaria is still something that we're still dealing with. But for the most part, these historical diseases is kind of a thing of the past. Emergent diseases still pose a challenge, but and I think this, again, like I said about people moving around, is a big problem in spreading it. But we understand a little bit better about how these diseases are spread and what needs to be done in order to prevent the spread. So that's the status of diseases, emergent and historical diseases. So toxicology is a study of chemical risks. So far we talked about biological risks, so now we're getting into chemical risks, right? So the study of chemical risks is called toxicology. There is a table in 17.1. My note here says that to know this table. So these are some of the toxins, chemicals that have effect on us. This table tells you what the source is, what type of toxins they are, which I'll go over in a moment, and what some of the effects are, right, on us. And the types of toxins that we have, or these categories, are neurotoxins, carcinogens, teratogens, allergens, and endocrine disruptors. Yeah. And some of these toxins kind of fall in multiples, so it's not just one or the other, but it generally have a category. So neurotoxins are ones that interfere with your nervous system. Many of the insecticides are neurotoxins that actually work by affecting the nervous system of the insects. So it could potentially have effects on us as well. Mercury and lead, these heavy metals, are neurotoxins as well. They affect our nervous system, right? So here's lead and mercury here. You should know the sources of them. We talked about most of these. We talked about in the other chapters, where whether it was the air pollution chapter or the water pollution chapter, and you should know what they are and what the effects are. All right, so those are neurotoxins. Carcinogens are things that cause cancer, right? And it could be that these chemicals are affecting some parts of the cell cycle, or it is a mutagen that causes mutation, so it's interfering with the it's affecting the DNA. And if you mess around with the DNA, there's a potential for it to become cancerous, right? Asbestos is it's a very well established carcinogen, as in, like, people who breathe in this stuff often get lung cancer. And same goes for radon. Radon was a radioactive gas that are naturally occurring. Formaldehyde is used in industries and things that's preservatives and things that a lot of our, like, dissection animals and things used to be preserving formaldehyde. They don't do that anymore because it's a carcinogen. So these are some of the well-known carcinogen. You also have arsenic, we talked about as well. That's naturally occurring in groundwater. PCBs, which is an industrial compound. It's been banned now. It's a carcinogen. Vinyl chloride, also carcinogen. So these are some of the well-known carcinogens. You should know about them. Allergens are things that cause... Nope, skipped one. So here you go. Teratogens. Teratogens are things that causes birth defects. Some usually cause some kind of developmental birth defects. So here's a little girl who was affected, and she has so I guess the development of her limbs was affected during development. There was a drug called thalidomide that was given to women to ease morning sickness. And it turned out that it causes birth defects. So that's what that effect was. So that's a teratogen. Alcohol is also a teratogen. You know, it causes fetal alcohol syndrome, developmental problems and things for developing fetus. So that is a teratogen as well. Right, so these are things that cause birth defects. Allergens are things that cause allergies. It could be in food or in medicines. It could be environmental. It could like things like pollen and what else? Things that you're breathing, things that's in the air, I guess. I was thinking of something else earlier and I forgot now. Endocrine disruptors are things that interfere with the hormone functions. A lot of endocrine disruptors are competitive inhibitors for the hormones. So the way hormone works is hormone is produced in one part of the body and usually have an effect on another part of the body, right? So it's a chemical that your body produces, you know. Some of it produced in the brain, some of it produced in reproductive organs, some of it produced in the thyroid and things. And it travels throughout your blood, and then there is some cell, another part of the body that has a receptor, right? And the hormone attaches to the receptor and induces some kind of response. Well, a lot of these endocrine disruptors have a shape that's similar to the hormone so that it might bind to the receptor. So it might elicit a response or wrongly, or it might kind of bind to it so the hormone can't bind to it, so that, you know, so it might have a different effect, but it's either way it's interfering with how these receptors are responding to the presence of the hormone. So that's how they generally work. We talked about these atrazine having effect on amphibians, right? It's making these male frogs act like females, and these some chemicals in the water in the rivers is causing the fish to become androgynous. So these are endocrine disruptors. If it's affecting fish and amphibians, it's very possible that it could have effect on us as well, and that's the concern. Although we care about the fish and amphibians too, because that would affect their population. Yeah, so that is the different types of chemicals. Let me stop here before I get into different ways that we study these things.